Hey everybody, welcome to Don't Get Rusty here at AOPA. And of course, happy holidays. It's our holiday edition, kind of. We got like one or two things on here, but today we're talking about aerodynamics. So the official title we came up with is critiquing the angle of attack. Aerodynamics is not a drag. So thanks again, you guys. Glad you're here with us, and let's move on to the next bit here. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping as always. We've got our attendee control panel. So if you are on the computer, on the PC over here, you're going to see something like what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen. And so if you have a question or want to speak with us, go ahead and click on that little question bubble, like it's a little cartoon bubble. Type your question in right where it says ask the staff a question, but most importantly, click that send button, because we don't see, if you don't click the send, we don't get to see it. If you're using a tablet, similar process, but you'll see this little question mark up here on the control panel. Again, type your question in where it says type your question, click that send button, and you should be good to go. Make sure you hit the send button. And remember that we do have an admin panel that shows us to the second, split second even, every reply that comes in the order that it came in. All right, as always, my name is Chris Moser. I am the Senior Director of Flight Training Education here at AOPA. I am a CFI, and I work here with CFIs and flight instructors in schools and everything else to support flight training all across. And as always with us, Dan, throw it to you.
Good afternoon, morning to wherever you're viewing from. Dan Justman. Get to work with the You Can Fly programs, all four of them now. The High School Initiative, Flight Training Initiative with Chris and Stephen, Flying Clubs, and Rusty Pilots, Instrument Rated Private Pilot. And thrilled to be there. Moving on to Stephen. Say hello, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen. Nailed it.
Did it.
Yeah, coordinator of Flight Training Initiative. I get to help try to tie all the loose ends together, work on our flight training experience survey throughout the year, variety of other projects that are amazing and a whole lot of fun. And I've been mentioning it all year long. You can see my picture there. I actually did finally finish running a marathon after training all year long for that.
Good job.
So ran the Philadelphia Marathon last month. Huzzah.
Hey, that was a big one. That was quite a thing. Stephen's been a long time prepping for that. Go ahead, Dan.
Want to thank the Jeppesen ForeFlight Boeing family of companies. Their support is making this possible. Don't Get Rusty webinars. We really appreciate you. Great products, charts, the EFB, and of course, Boeing creating aircraft that move us all around this world. Thank you for your support.
Hey, if it's not Boeing, I ain't going.
I love it. And also want to thank AOPA Foundation. That's who Chris, I, and Stephen work for. All of the Don't Get Rusty programs and the other You Can Fly programs are funded by generous contributions to the AOPA Foundation. So everything that we do, not a dollar of it comes from AOPA member dues, but we sure do appreciate the donations to keep everything moving forward. If you'd like to donate, please visit aopafoundation.org.
Most important one, Dan.
Reminders, yes, we have not had any questions yet about wings credit, so I'm happy that we are proactively addressing this one today. So yes, if you are watching this broadcast live, you are eligible for wings credit, but only if you're watching live. If you had registered with your FAAsafety.gov email address, there's nothing more that you need to do. We've got it. We'll send it in, submit it. In a few days, you will see that credit applied to your account. If you did not use that email address, please send your email to ftinitiative@aopa.org. Foxtrot Tango Initiative at aopa.org, and Stephen will be happy to get you added to the list. The other question many people ask is this recorded? You guys talked about some great stuff, and I would love to watch it again. Yes, they are recorded. You can see them in two places. One on our YouTube channel. Just visit the AOPA pilot video page. Please do subscribe if you can, and go to the Don't Get Rusty's webinar playlist. We've got many episodes there. This one will be up and running in a few days, so please give it a couple days for it to get loaded up and running there. But also you can find it webinars.aopa.org. We've got a playlist there on the aopa.org website. You can find it there. Feel free to bookmark that page as well.
There it goes. Oh, there we go. Oops, dang it. Dang it.
So excited. You can't. He's chomping at the bit to get to this content. It's so good. Stephen, what happened today years ago?
In 1968, Apollo 8 launched. It's the first manned mission to the moon. I was looking at the stats here. He goes, yeah, 2 hours and 50 minutes. They actually did their maneuver to escape Earth's gravity using velocity. They were just below escape velocity, but used the moon's pull to get them out. So I think the total mission time, according to the Wikipedia page, was 68 hours to go. Made several rotations of the moon and came back.
Very cool.
I decided to do 2 slides of this because this photo of the Earth was the first photo taken by man, by a person, of the full view of the planet. So one of the mission gentlemen looked back and took a photo of the planet. So, and just the chart here to show you what their mission plan was, coming and going. Just thought it was a really cool thing.
Yes, that is pretty cool. It's out of this world. Yeah, it's horrible. All right, you guys.
I'm gonna get a soundboard loaded up for you.
Anyway, thanks for doing that, Stephen and Dan. And so what are we doing today? Well, we're talking about aerodynamics, of course. It is a huge topic. So I just had to kind of pick some things that I wanted to do. And man, I know Dan and Stephen know this. It's like I decided to go crazy in the sense of going nuts with lift. So we're going to talk a little bit about lift, but we're really going to talk about some really advanced stuff with lift and see what we can do. I even tested this on one of our colleagues here just to make sure that it was going to make sense. So I'm hoping you guys will enjoy that. So that's more for fun, not so much practical, but then we will get back to the practical. We'll talk a little bit about stalls, accelerated stalls. I have an amazing handout for you with so much stuff on it. It's like a Christmas gift of handouts, as it were, with all the links. You should be able to find that on the panel over there. So grab the handout with all the different links on it. And then if we have time, some bonus stuff too, and I'll do the best I can to answer questions because aerodynamics, of course, is a huge topic. So let's get started. Actually, first of all, since we're talking about lift as the first topic, which everybody loves, which is the best explanation of how lift is created? So we're gonna get that poll going. Is it Bernoulli, A? Is it B, Newtonian lift, or the Newton explanation? Is it both A and B, Bernoulli and Newton? Or is it A or B? AK, they're the same thing, doesn't matter. And then, of course, E, my favorite is it pure willpower / magic? What's the best explanation? What do you think, Dan? What's the best explanation?
Magic, without a doubt.
Yeah.
If I can't see it, I can't believe it.
I can tell you from all the research that I've done for this one, it is just magic.
I love it.
So let's see what we got going here. Looking at the poll. I guess I should pop it open so I can see what's happening with it. Let's see what the audience is giving us. And we've got about 45%, so we'll give you guys just a little bit more time to make your choice. Oh, goodness, look, we definitely have a trend happening here. And as always, I have my friends too with my favorite answers. So keep going here. We got about 63%, so we'll give you guys another like 10 or 15 seconds. Let's see if we can get it up above 70% before we stop it. Looking for it. Come on, 69%, just a few more. There it is, 70%. All right, go ahead, Stephen, when you're ready. Let's go ahead and undo the poll and look at our results. So we should see the results popping up, and you should see, look at that, 42% saying Bernoulli, but then 47%, the majority, saying it's both A and B, Bernoulli and Newton. Look at the only 4% for Newton. I think that's really interesting. And then the 3%, it's the same thing basically. 4% as always for magic. So that actually, like that answer got more than the one answer there. So I think it is. It's a magical time of year. Okay, let's go ahead and undo the poll and get back to the show. All right, cool. All right, so the thing that I want to talk about today is, look, why is this so controversial? And I bet that a lot of you have had the experience. I don't know about you, Dan, but people get fired up about the explanations of lift. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. In fact, what I wanted to do was just give it a little story of what happened, how this started for me. During my private pilot training, I was using this book. This is the Private Pilot Handbook by Jeppesen, brought to you by our friends at Boeing. Jeppesen, guiding you to guided flight. I don't know. But it's a good book, and they did a good job in there. They explained basically the Bernoulli explanation of lift. I think there's a little bit of the Newton stuff, but I remember it said something about, over the top of the airfoil, air gets speeded up and that causes lower pressure. But it didn't explain why. So I went to my flight instructor, and what did I said, yeah, I explained to him like what I'd read or whatever. And then I said, why does it go faster over the top? And you know what he told me? He told me this one. Well, the two air molecules at the front of the airfoil have to meet at the back of the airfoil. And since it's longer over the top, how many of you guys have heard this explanation? Therefore, it has to go faster. And that's why there's lower pressure. And I can remember thinking to myself, why? Why do they have to meet at the end? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I kind of let it go. But it definitely set up in me this sort of wonder of like, what is actually going on? Because that doesn't seem to make sense. Why would they have to meet? And so that's where the journey began. So what I wanted to do is I just wanted to hit, these are from NASA's Index of Aerodynamic Slides, the incorrect theories of lifts. I just wanted to knock 3 of those out, the 3 ones that they've got. There is a link on the handout to this webpage if you've never seen it. Really cool. And so the first one is, if you've been told the longer theory equal transit theory, it's called, I kind of explained what it was. That one is not correct. The air molecules do not meet at the end. And in fact, the ones over the top, and I'll show you a photo a little bit later here from a wind tunnel experiment, the ones on the top actually they get there faster, like well before the ones on the bottom. So that was not right. There are a couple of other ones though, because then I started, as I continued in my flight training and went to Arizona, I was at a flight school out there, and we would have discussions among the students and CFIs. And another one that came up was that people would talk about, well, there's the Newtonian, the skipping stone theory of lift. And this idea is basically like, everybody knows this, when you take a big piece of plywood out in the wind, and you start to feel it lifting, or you stick your hand out the car window and you kind of angle it like this, and you feel it going up. And so they say the air hits the bottom, bounces, and it pushes the wing up. Every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So there is some truth to that. It is true that Newton's third law, that every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, that is true. But the problem with this one is it completely leaves out the airflow over the top of the airfoil. So this is not a good explanation when they only talk about the bottom of the airfoil is all that matters. That's not true. So not a good one. Any questions so far, Dan, as I'm rolling through, or?
No, keep going. This is good. We've got some comments. I'm capturing the ones that we can pick up later, but for now, we're doing great. Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, and incorrect theory number 3, I remember this one vividly when it was shown to me, because I was on my journey trying to discover, asking questions, kind of bothering the heck out of my CFIs. And as I was essentially doing my own CFI training, trying to do some research and figure out, because I knew that I couldn't just figure it out on my own. I wanted to find the right folks. Somebody drew me a Venturi on the board and said, look, here's a Venturi. You know the Venturi, the pipe with the pinch in the middle. And they said, if you look at it, this kind of looks like a wing, right? The bottom part. Well, just erase the top one and there you go. It's a Venturi, same thing. That's how it works. That's Bernoulli. And of course, this is not correct either, this half Venturi theory, because all the aerodynamicists and everything say that there is no pinch on the top. It doesn't work like a tube. There's a free stream, there's atmosphere. This is not the way it works. So, and in fact, if you try to do the math using this one, it does not account for the lift at all. So this is not a correct or nearly completely accurate one. So what do we do? What are the reasonable explanations? And by the way, don't worry if you are some of my super educated aerodynamic folks out there. I'm going to go deep on this one. Like I've spent a lot of time doing research, so we're going beyond this. We're going deep, and so I'm hoping you enjoy that purely for fun. But let's say practical purposes. Like if I'm just instructing somebody, I just want them to have a good explanation of what's going on, and that is trying to avoid at least most of the limitations of our explanations. It's these two. And of course, this is where people get heated. Which one is it? Is it Bernoulli? Is it Newton? Is it both? Of course, we know our Bernoulli that the airflow goes above. In both cases, air goes over the top and bottom of each wing. In the Bernoulli one, the airfoil has a shape to it that it affects the airflow and creates a low pressure system. The airflow accelerates, creates low pressure up here according to Bernoulli's principle. And then down below the wing, there's a positive pressure. The only one that I sometimes hear and that I have learned from doing my research here is that some people will say it creates suction up here and it pulls the wing up. That is actually not correct. Yeah, that's not correct according to the physics. The correct way to say that one is actually it's the positive, this higher pressure air here, relatively higher pressure, pushes the wing up into that low pressure. In fact, the book that I read this, and I'll talk about this gentleman who I read here in a minute, he basically says that pressure doesn't work that way. Pressure doesn't get suction. It's actually positive, harder pressure pushes into the area of low pressure. So high moves to low. Low does not suck high. So it doesn't work that way. So that's just one. But the Bernoulli one is perfectly fine. The only thing that this one, of course, this is what the Jeppesen book had in it that I remember. And the only part is it doesn't say, well, why? Why does it speed up? It just says that it does. And and that's perfectly fine. If you're cool with that, that's a great explanation. And totally, I would say that's good observations here. On the Newtonian one, we can see in wind tunnels too, the airflow does get bent down. It gets bent up in the upwash and then bent down behind it, both above and below. Notice above and below, there's bending happening down. And that's your equal and opposite reaction, Newton's third law. Air gets pushed down. If the air is getting pushed down, the wing must be getting pushed up because the wing's doing that pushing. So just those two together. This is the one that I like because I like to talk about the hand out the car window. Everybody's done that. Everybody's played with it. To me, it's intuitive.
Makes sense.
But I don't think neither of these are necessarily wrong. They're just both kind of simplified versions of what's actually happening. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, Chris, question for you on this one from Scott. It was a great reminder is that the wing or the air doesn't necessarily flow over the wing. It's the wing passing through the air,
Yes.
right? So it's the
Yes.
parcel of air. And then raises the question about what about symmetrical wings? We're looking in these examples too. We've got more of a curved surface, but what about like an aerobatic airplane? What would happen in that circumstance?
We're gonna actually talk about some of that, but I'll just give you the preview on that.
Yeah.
The basic idea is that in order for lift to happen, the big thing that we want to do is that, remember, you could have an airplane sitting still and there's a lot of wind and you have to, why do we have to tie them down? If there's a storm, you will see airplanes get flipped and they'll start to fly in their tie down. So what really the idea here is that there just needs to be airflow over the wing. So whether that is created in relative terms by the wing moving through the air, which is what we typically do, or it could be the wind blowing over. It's just that movement around, that flow around the wing. So I don't know that we want to parse all that. We know that in normal terms, what we think of, what we perceive is the airplane and the wing are moving through the air, causing that airflow to happen, that relative wind, right? It's relative motion to what we are. We're moving through, the air seems like it's blowing against us, whether there's a wind or not, whether the wind would be blowing or not. And then of course it could be sitting still too. So it's really probably the best way to think about what we look at is we kind of imagine the wing we're kind of flying along with the wing, looking at it so we can see the motion of the air relative to it. The other point you asked was all the symmetrical. So the key part here is that in order for an airfoil to create lift, we know symmetrical wings create lift, right? That's why that half venturi or the purely like saying that Newton is no good doesn't necessarily work, because with a symmetrical wing, we either need to have a wing with camber, we need to have a positive angle of attack, which is what a symmetrical wing would use, positive angle of attack, or a combination of the two. You could have a cambered airfoil with a positive angle of attack. So as long as you have one of those three things, you'll be able to create lift with your airfoil. Hopefully that answers it.
Great,
cool.
Thank you.
Okay, so these are the basic explanations. And honestly, this is probably as far as you need to go, practically speaking. But again, I'm an aviation nerd, and for me, that driving question, all because somebody told me that equal transit theory thing, I was like, I want it. What is actually happening? Why don't we know? Why is this so difficult to explain? So here's where I ended up, years and years in the making, because I'm a nerd and I wonder about things and I think about stuff like this for whatever reason. And so I came across, and this was just the last so far in a long line of books that I've read and things, but this book is called Understanding Aerodynamics. I have a link to it on the handout because I'm going to talk about part of what's in here. It's written by a gentleman named Doug McLean. He is a PhD in aerodynamics. He worked for Boeing for a long time, for a number of years. He was an engineer for them. Additionally, he in Boeing, he did a lot of the coding for the CFD, the computational fluid dynamics stuff that they used to design airfoils and things like that. So I think he's got some credibility. The guy knows what he's talking about. And so what he did was the vast majority of this book, let me just see if I can show you, like there is just lots of math. This was written for people that know fluid dynamics and physics and all that. He's just got, it's like every page almost has equations in it and all kinds of stuff. So if you're into that, check it out. That's unfortunate, I don't have the training in math to do that part. But the cool thing, why did I buy this book? In there is a section where he said, he tries to do a physical explanation in 2D, not in 3D, for people that are non-technical, AKA not the math. And so he tries to explain it for the majority of us that don't have that background. And I saw somebody in there mention something about the Euler equations, and there's the Navier-Stokes equations, and there's the CUDA condition and all that other stuff. Yeah, he's got all that stuff in there. So check this out. So this is the guy that talks about this, and so he tries to explain what's actually going on as best he can. I'm going to give you a little preview up front. The reason that we have simplistic explanations is because this thing is complicated. However, I thought he did a pretty good job. It took me a couple of readings to really try to internalize it. And I'm going to do the best that I can to explain kind of or summarize what he talks about. But I would highly recommend, if you're a nerd like me, go get his book. And so I said the link is on the handout for you to go check it out. So here we go. First off, some basic things we want to keep in mind as we're talking about his explanation of how lift works. Key concept number one, lift involves forces being exchanged. In other words, he does say the wing is pushing the air down. So right away, I was like, oh, cool. I like Newton. There's Newton, right? Must be done. Not so easy, but it does happen. The air is being pushed down. He says too, you need to remember that the air acts like a fluid. And so like I kind of pulled this picture off. I think this is from the NASA website of an airfoil. And it just shows we know that that air flows smoothly over the airfoil. And one of the things he talks about is when the wing is sitting still, think of it like something in water. Air acts like a fluid. There is pressure all around it on top, ambient pressure, top, bottom, sides. It's all pushing on the airfoil or on all of us too, right? So it's all pushing around it. So when the wing starts to move, even though we are going to get some pressure differences, there's still pressure pushing down on the wing. And so the reason that the flow remains smooth is because air is still pushing. Just like if you take your hand and move it around in a swimming pool, it's not like the water all of a sudden disappears. It still surrounds you and keeps moving and keeps pressing on your hand as you move it through that fluid. So the air acts the same way. So it continuously flows around it. So keep that in mind. That's why we have this smooth airflow, at least in the subsonic parts here. Then he said the other thing is we need to remember is that everybody talks about Newton's third law. Every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But the part that we don't think about so much, and maybe don't use as much, is Newton's second law. He says this is apparent in what's happening above and below the wing, that force, when there's a force, that is equal to mass times acceleration. So when you apply a force, and we're going to assume the mass stays the same because we're not changing the mass of the air. If we apply a force, there's going to be acceleration. Or if we take a force away, there's going to be a deceleration. So Newton's second law. Somebody, I see that one there. Equations, I know. The equations are too hard. So this is the only equation we're going to use today. I honestly wish that I did have the background to understand more of the equations because I probably would like it. All right, so now let's start getting into this, you guys. Let's see if you can follow along with me here. I did test this out, so I'm hoping this is going to make sense to everybody. Again, practical for flying, not so much, just more because I'm curious and I'm a nerd. Here it is. Airflow changes during the generation of lift. So the first part he says is that when the wing starts to move, there are two fields created above and below the wing. All right, and in fact, there's two types of fields as well. There's a velocity field that's created and a pressure field that's created. And one of the key things he says is these things don't just happen right along the airfoil surface, they happen well above it. In fact, you can see this here, and this is from an old wind tunnel diagram, and you can see right here, here are the kind of like they cut the smoke off in the lines in the what is it called? The wind tunnel. And as the airflow moves, you can see as it approaches and gets over the wing, look how much it's accelerating over the top, and look how high it goes. It's not just these couple of lines accelerating, the whole thing does. So the wing is affecting air well above and below it. So that's kind of a key feature here. All right. So what he says is that an airfoil, this is going back to that question somebody asked earlier, in order for an airfoil to create lift, it has to have camber, has to have a positive angle of attack, or it has to have both. All right, so you can have either camber, positive angle of attack, or both. All right. The other thing he says is air is getting pushed down, and if you were to follow the flow, you can see when the air is like on those lines, if it wasn't cut like this, you could see how the air does get pushed down by both the top and bottom of the wing. Now, here's something interesting. He says the speed above the wing always increases, always. So it's something we already learned. But this is the one I didn't know. He said the speed below the wing usually decreases. So I guess what he means by that is that maybe in some cases, probably not the wings that we're typically flying, but there can be ones where the airflow below does not necessarily slow down, just stays like as it was. So that's the velocity field. So we got a velocity field that's formed. Haven't gotten into the why yet, just explaining what's happening. Velocity fields are happening both above and below. We also have pressure fields that are being, go ahead, Dan.
So just looking at that image, occurring to me is you've got the speed changing above and below. So you've got differences there. Is that why if you look further back in that picture towards the left-hand side, you've got all that disruption? So you've got two different speeds of air moving that's together and that's what's creating that disruption?
That's a good question. I don't know that I can answer that definitively, but yeah, I would say as the air is coming back, you're creating turbulence behind it. And
Right.
we get into, like, we know that the airplane creates a wake and all that sort of stuff. And of course, we're looking in 2D here in that sense. But yeah, I would say that those airflows coming together is now creating that wake disturbance behind it. As we increase angle of attack, that's going to get bigger because we do have pressure differences, right? Same thing happens in our atmosphere. For the pressure fields, we have pressure fields above and below as well. He says when lift is being generated, that there is always lower pressure above the wing, always. But again, below the wing, he said, usually it's higher pressure than the ambient pressure around. In other words, whatever the standard atmospheric pressure is around us. All right. So usually it is higher, but maybe it doesn't have to be. It could just be ambient. The one thing I do want to make clear, though, is that we're talking about up here is this is going to be lower than this. So the below will be higher. There's still going to be a pressure differential. What he's just talking about is that on most wings, I think this is going to be higher than ambient. It's going to get even higher than the ambient, but in some cases, it may just stay the same as ambient, just like with the velocity. All right. If there's no lift being created, the airplane's sitting on the ground, there are no pressure differences. All right. And then again, as I mentioned, these effects don't just happen near the airfoil. They happen well above and below. So it's affecting it in kind of these graduated areas out. All right. Now, here's where we get real. Okay, so here's the part that I need to explain. So here's where he talks about, and so now the thing that I was wondering is, who's going to win? Is it Bernoulli or is it Newton, right? Are one of them going to win? All right, so first thing he mentions in here, and he breaks this down in steps, and it's pretty heavy, so I'm hoping I'm doing a good job explaining what he talks about, is he says that remember I talked about the fact that there's always air is just pushing on stuff, right? There's always pressure around everything. Like I said, the airfoil is still getting pushed on no matter what. He said that what happens is the air parcels above and below the wing, notice this, see higher pressure above them, which causes the downward turn of air. What he's talking about are these arrows right here, these downward facing arrows. If we have low pressure here that's being formed, the air pressure up here that's ambient is higher. So it's going to push. Remember, push is high to low. So this is pushing down. And of course, we know the wing is moving as all this is going on. So as it's pushing down, there is an acceleration. There's a force coming this way, and that's going to then change, in this case, the direction of the flow. Force times mass equals acceleration. Acceleration could be a change in velocity or a change in direction. And so he said, this is what's causing that downflow of air over the top of the wing. The same thing here. We get high pressure forming here that's higher than the ambient pressure here most of the time, right? So that is also causing a downward pressure, which is what's pushing the airflow down this way. That's why we're seeing that downflow. So it's because of these two things. All right, hope that one's clear. Then let's talk about the horizontal part. The horizontal part. Right here, he says that the air parcel entering here, and we know already, see all the negatives? This is low pressure. Low pressure is concentrated right here towards the front and down near the airfoil, and it kind of slowly dissipates as you move out. There's the field, pressure field. Notice the high pressure concentrated here, slowly dissipating out to eventually becoming ambient. So he says, as this air parcel enters, there is ambient pressure back here. It is higher than the low pressure here. Force times mass equals acceleration. The air mass is not changing, so that force is accelerating that air. The air is speeding up. And then, of course, we know from Bernoulli, as the air speeds up, therefore the pressure goes down. That's what's causing. So the force here is creating this low pressure here, right? And then as the air continues to move through, eventually it starts to, like the lower pressure starts to dissipate, going slowly, gradually back to ambient. It encounters this higher pressure back here, which eventually slows it back down to ambient pressure. So that's where we're getting that air going. So the pressure here, this ambient pressure here is pushing into this lower pressure, which accelerates it, also causing the low pressure. This blew my mind, right? And one of the things he says is, do not think of this in linear terms. We cannot think in terms of cause and effect. The airfoil moving through the air sets these fields up, and this is what's going on. He says this is why we have so many incorrect explanations, because the way it works in fluid dynamics is not necessarily something that's easy for us to envision. But he's saying that this is his best explanation of what is going on. To back him up, I have an uncle of mine actually that is a PhD in aerospace engineering. He actually did work on rockets and missiles. So he's literally a rocket scientist. He designed a bunch of rockets his whole life. He's now retired from that stuff. But I remember asking him about this, and I was trying to go through my cause and effect whole thing. And he says, well, you got kind of the right idea. He goes, but he said, what happens is the wing is sitting still, there's nothing. The wing starts to move, these fields set themselves up. And so he said a very similar thing to me about the same thing, that these fields just sort of create and then cause these differences. So I know Chris and I were talking about this. This is not, by the way, McLean talking, but what we were saying is we think it's the wing moving through the air as you accelerate that sets these fields up. So the wing is causing this disturbance, which now sets up these fields. That's not necessarily McLean's official answer. That's us trying to think about it. All right. On the bottom, it's just the opposite. We've got higher pressure here. As the ambient air is moving and encounters this higher pressure area, there's a force moving this way. Well, it's a decelerating force. So as it decelerates, pressure increases. As the air moves through and under the wing, then it eventually encounters less or a lower pressure, the ambient pressure compared to the high pressure here, and then eventually it accelerates back to whatever the ambient was. So that's where we get that deceleration happening underneath. I hope that makes sense. He does say that this whole thing with the acceleration, deceleration pressure, there's Bernoulli, right? So we have air being moved downward by the pressures here, by these pressures, the higher pressure up here, the higher pressure here is deflecting air downwards. And then we have these pressure differences, the high low with acceleration, that's Bernoulli. So effectively, both are happening at the same time. But here's the key that McLean says. He says, it's not one or the other. They both are working together to create lift. So that's all happening all at once. You can't divide them out. And it's not even saying, he's not even saying it's like you can, it's just two ways of explaining the same thing. It's not. There's Newtonian stuff happening and there's Bernoulli stuff happening. Both are happening at once. They're part of this whole system that creates these fields. That's kind of his answer for this one. All right. Questions before I move on to the next slide that we're popping up?
Here's an interesting one. Where does forward turning moment, and in parentheses, the need for balancing tail downforce come from?
So that gets into, I guess what he means is like I'd have to have a different picture for that. So that's a whole different one that I could show.
Sure.
But the basic idea is that the lift, the wing, the main wing on most aircraft, we'll assume like a Cessna or a Piper, right? That wing has a center of lift. So that's going to be, the lift is here. And by itself, it's not balanced. So the way that we balance our aircraft for that is ahead of the wing, we're going to have the mass of the center of weight or the center of gravity, the CG, right? That's where the engine is. That's where all that stuff is. So that's going to be pulling this way. So the reason we've got tail down back here is to balance that, because you can think of the lifts. Let me grab my airplane here. If we can imagine, if you guys can see this, the lift is here. Here's the engine pulling this way. And it's like by that, it would just, this is what would happen, right? So that the horizontal stabilizer creates downward lift to balance that like a seesaw. And that's how otherwise it would be unstable. If you have too much of this, it's going to pull the airplane this way. Too much of this, it's going to pull it that way. But it's kind of like almost like hanging on a thread of lift is one way to think about it, I guess. But really, of course, it's not a thread. It's like the lift is pushing the airplane up.
Sure.
But that's how we balance it. I'm hoping that it answers that.
Hey, Chris, a couple questions came through about undercamber, like on the bottom of the wing, undercamber for stall or for like Kit Fox airplanes, things like that. Anything that you can relate to this conversation with an undercamber wing and how that would affect?
I don't know that necessarily, other than saying that we know that is, again, now I'm speaking just from, I'm theorizing, I'm hypothesizing. I don't have a definitive answer for that one. But maybe my thought would be that, first of all, you've got better sort of that deflection of air. This is getting away from his explanation of that. Maybe it's gathering more of that high pressure area here, right? Slowing things down, decelerating, which would create more just from the form of it. To me, I'd have to go out of this explanation and just go back to just your basic simplified Newton stuff. It's just bending air more would be my guess. But yeah, he doesn't address that, so I can't say that I can go there. That's a good one. I have to think about that.
Got another one for you here real quick from a friend of ours on the West Coast that you and I both know quite well. It said the center of lift on top of airfoil is aft the center of lift on the bottom.
Center of lift on top of the airfoil is aft the center of lift. Oh, here, is that what he's talking about here on this thing?
Mm-hmm.
I assume that's, let's see. So yeah, it does look like that. Of course, you have to maybe add all these up. I don't know. I'd have to see it, but I think that actually fits with the diagrams I've seen in the Naval Aviator's Guide as well, with the pressures. So I'll have to see, maybe clarify what you're getting at, and I'd love to hear it. So all right, let's go to the next slide then. So that's the basic thing. Hopefully that kind of sets up the idea. Here are some summary things based on what McLean is saying. And by the way, this is all filtered by me trying to explain it. If you want to dig in more, go check out his book, Understanding Aerodynamics. We go this way with it by Doug McLean. I've got the link on the handout for you too. All right, so he says, there is a reciprocal cause and effect relationship between velocity and pressure fields. They are working together and it's reciprocal. It's the cycle happening, right? The high pressure from below is what's exerting. So the high pressure here is pushing the wing up, not the suction on top. Remember, high pushes into low. Here's an interesting thing he says too, is how are these pressure fields being maintained? It's because this air, this pressure coming from above, this higher pressure up here, is containing that area of low pressure, while it also is then deflecting the air downward. And he said the same thing's happening here. That's like these pressure areas, he says, what is it? The downturn flow sustains the high and low pressures areas. And so of course, this is creating low pressure as it's pushing down as well. All right. And then air is being affected by Newton's second law. Keep that in mind. And then the last part he says, it's just again, he says the pressure differences are causing, so these pressure differences here, all the arrows, are causing the change in flow of both speed, like I talked about going horizontally, and direction. This is the part that's pushing down. The changes in the flow and speed, so changes in flow, speed, and direction also cause the pressure differences. And he says, is this sort of getting something for nothing? He says, no. And he explains kind of what I did with the idea of the forces and acceleration that are happening, that they're not, they're just feeding one another. He said, avoid thinking of this in a linear cause-effect relationship. Now, let me bring it to a head and then I'll get into some other topics unless we may have other questions too, but like I said, this is tough. What did I get out of this by learning all this, right? I kept looking for this simplified answer. Notice that this is only in 2D. We know that real wings are in 3D. What I got from him was, this stuff is complicated. He has 500 pages on aerodynamics using all the math and all the equations. He said that this section of it was the hardest part for him to read, or for him to write, I should say, for him to write, because they know all the math. The math is not in question. They understand all that. They understand how all the equations work. He said basically what's going on is that this is fluid dynamics. When you get it in 3D, it's really complicated. Like you said, you got the Navier-Stokes equations and the Euler equations and all this other stuff. We can't calculate those in our head, which is why we have a hard time envisioning what is going on here. It's just really complicated. So any explanations that we have are thereby kind of limited by that. So what I took away from that was, I get it. I get the idea of what's happening. And that way, for me, it took some of the part off of like, okay, it's probably not going to happen that I'm going to get a simplified explanation, because there isn't one. It's complicated. Luckily, though, do we have to know all this stuff to fly an airplane well? Nope, we don't. But I kind of like digging, and I did kind of enjoy getting a different answer on this. There is debate about this, though. Check out the article. I think it says nobody has an explanation for lift or something like that on the handout, because there are people then that even take some exception, and they gave him a critique on why the low pressure is forming. But then that person got critiqued too. So check it out. It's the fun continues. Okay, yes. And then somebody said, just change my answer back to magic. Not bad. It is kind of cool. It's still amazing. All right, let's go on to the next one here. So let's get into some practical stuff that I think you guys could use. We learned about lift. Why do we even learn about lift in the first place? Well, the real reason we have to learn about lift is because we need to understand angle of attack and critical angle of attack, because why the lift is or how exactly it's being created is not critical to us flying the airplane, but what is critical is that we understand how the wing behaves, and especially when it gets to critical angle of attack, because that gets us in trouble. Yes, and Dave, I do have a thing on ground effects, so hopefully if I've got time, or I may do it during the Q&A, I can do that when I see that question right there. All right, so when could stalls happen? Well, we know, and I'm going to do this relatively quickly because I'm assuming most folks out there are familiar with the critical angle and all that, because what I really want to talk about is accelerated stalls. When could they happen? Obviously, when could a stall realistically happen to us? Well, maybe we're in the pattern and we're trying to follow a slower airplane. We're in like a Bonanza or a faster Piper or even a Cessna. We're following, let's say, a Cub or something like that, or like some kind of light sport type aircraft. Like, I'm trying to think of what's the one that Carlo flies, the one's like a big biplane. Anyway, so something slower. So maybe we try to stay behind them in the pattern and we get too slow and we can get into an inadvertent stall. We're getting too slow and final for whatever reason. Maybe we're not paying attention. We're trying to stretch a glide. Maybe we've had an engine out and we see where we want to go. We see that slipping away, and so we keep pulling the nose up trying to get to it. We could get into a stall, or even just getting behind the power curve. And the idea of getting too slow, we keep adding power, and we get to the point where now, as we We have to, like in slow flight, we have to add more power to go slower. How do we avoid those things? Number one, I've got a link for you guys on Essential Aerodynamics from the Air Safety Institute, so check it out. But tips to avoid, remember that pitch controls speed and power controls altitude. You may remember me talking about how I land, which I use the opposite when I'm landing to aim, but it is true that pitch does control speed. So if I'm getting slow, how do I fix it? Put the nose down. You got to remember that. So it's like if I'm in a glide and I'm coming up too short, I'm getting slow, you got to put the nose down to speed up. And then the power controls your altitude. You cannot use, we don't have enough thrust in our airplanes to just pull ourselves out of that kind of stuff. Fly by the numbers. So on landing and doing things like that, use your POH, fly by that. Is it a HATS? I see it says Carlo has a HATS. It's not the HATS because he's got a couple of airplanes that he's built. And I just can't remember the name of it right now. It's an open cockpit, crazy thing that goes really slow. And then practice slow flight and stalls to better know your airplane. Practice slow flight and stalls. Because the more we can understand how our airplane behaves at different configurations, different weights and things like that, the better we'll be able to recognize when we're getting too slow. All right. Now, here's the key, the one I really wanted to get to with the stall part though, because people typically understand stalls. We've done that during training, but the thing that I think a lot of folks do, and it's because of our training, because we're trying to keep things docile and relatively safe, is that we're always doing stalls by pitching the nose up, right, over the horizon, and it's always we're doing them upright. We're not always doing them in much of a turn and that sort of thing. But remember, the key here is that stalls occur at critical angle of attack when that airflow separates, just like in the picture here, right? You keep increasing angle of attack, it's going to separate at some point, and so now we don't have that smooth airflow anymore, and then now we're in trouble, right? The wing's not going to fly anymore until we recover from it. When will this happen? It can happen when you're heavier, when you've got higher wing loading, like in high performance type aircraft, especially like jets and things like that, and then you're pulling more than 1 G. So in a turn, we can pull Gs. Like in a steep turn, you probably felt yourself pulling some Gs. Or if you were diving, like in this aerobatic aircraft picture, and you go to pull out. I had this experience in an extra. We were doing some spin training. I got to go up and fly in an extra for about an hour. And I remember doing the spins, and I had the nose. We were literally pointed at the ground. And I thought, okay, we should be fast enough now. I want to pull out, and I would pull out, and I put ourselves right into another stall. So it can happen again, even with the nose pointed down. So that angle of attack is not the horizon. The angle of attack is based on your pitch attitude. And so that can be anyway. So fly responsibly. So what I wanted to show you guys really quick was this. I thought this video out of Essential Aerodynamics was really good. I'm going to zoom in and check this out. These are just 2 demonstrations. You won't be able to hear the sound on this, but even though if you watch the video on the course, the Essential Aerodynamics, you can. Notice that the airplane's pitching up. This is like a regular stall. Airplane's pitching up, keeps pitching up. You can see the airspeed indicator decreasing. This is going to be a 1G type stall. There it goes. There's the stall, and then it'll show us again the airspeed indicator and a G meter to give us that. So here it is. The airplane stalled at about 70 knots in this case and at 1G. So check out the next one though. In this case, we're going to do an accelerated stall. All you have to do is exceed the critical angle of attack. Notice the airspeed diving. Airspeed is increasing. We're up probably over 100 knots as far as I can tell there. Jacks it up, increases the critical angle. And we get a stall right then. And in fact, we're going to show it again right here. That stall happened at 100 knots and at 3.5 Gs. You overloaded the wing in that case, all right? Bad news. So why do we want to be aware of that? Because it can happen in any phase of flight if you jack up, you really pull on the controls. The biggest thing is fly responsibly. And the thing, and Essential Aerodynamics, the course, I definitely want to recommend you guys go check it out. The key there that they talk about is they were really trying to caution people against buzzing. Like people that go down, they're low to the ground, they're trying to show off to their friends and end up trying to do a dive and then pull up hard. That's when people end up doing an accelerated stall. But this naturally flows into the other part that I wanted to do, which is maneuvering speed. I'm sure you guys all know maneuvering speed. Dan, I'm sure you remember too. It's like, you know, if the air gets bumpy, we slow down to maneuvering speed. That way, what do you remember, Dan? It keeps the airplane from getting.
Sorry, I'm reading comments here. Mile a minute.
No worries.
Nope, keep going.
Keeps the airplane from getting damaged. This is how we like protect ourselves so the airplane won't get hurt if we're flying into turbulent air, that sort of thing. So let's take a look at this. This is from Rod Machado's book. Give him a shout out. He has a new book. Actually, this is his old book, Private Pilot Handbook. He has a new one, the Private Commercial book. There's a link to that too if you like his graphics. This is from an AOPA article that I've got linked on the handout as well. And this leads into that same idea of the accelerated stall, all right? So I love this. I never understood maneuvering speed until I saw the stuff in his book and read it some years ago. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys too. on our aerodynamics part here. So check it out. Here we are at 140 knots. We're in cruise. And so maybe we get hit by either pulling the elevator back really hard. Maybe we're doing this in a dive and we decide to pull back, or we get hit by a strong vertical wind and we get around a storm or something. So what he basically says here is that in this cruise, in the lift idea, the lift equation too, is like we can create lift, we can increase lift by either increasing our velocity or by increasing our angle of attack. So we're cruising at 140 knots. We're creating plenty of lift from velocity, so we don't really need much of an angle of attack. So in this case, we're flying at 1G, we're at 3 degrees angle of attack at 140 knots. If we get bumped by a gust of wind or just pull back on the controls really hard, every time that we double the original angle of attack, we're gonna pull another G. So in other words, if you look right here, we're at 1G, 140 knots, we pull and go to 6 degrees angle of attack, we are at 2 Gs. Notice we have not stalled yet. Most aircraft, you might know, are equipped for about the normal category aircraft, about 3.8 Gs. If you're in utility, about 4.4 Gs, right? That's gonna, anything more than that, you're gonna damage the aircraft. So we'll just call it 4 Gs for right now to round it. Notice how though, we have not stalled yet. We have not reached critical angle because most general aviation aircraft, critical angle is between 16 and 18 degrees angle of attack. So if we continue to pull harder or get hit, let's say we triple the original angle of attack, now we're at 3 Gs. Again, we have not stalled. Now we're getting close to damaging the aircraft, right? Because they can handle around 4 Gs. We have still not stalled. We have not reached critical. So let's say we're continuing to just jack it back really hard to really get hit by turbulence, and we end up quadrupling the original angle of attack of 3 degrees. Now we're at 4 Gs. And at this point, now we're at the limit, right? Now we're at the structural limit of what it was tested for, but we still haven't stalled. As we continue harder, right? Maybe we've pulled even harder than that. We've quintupled. Now we're at 5 Gs. At this point, now we have probably damaged the aircraft, and we still have not stalled. And then finally, in this case, we finally reach critical angle of attack at 6 times the original angle of attack, or 6 Gs. And so you can see what would happen. So this is not maneuvering speed, right? We get into turbulent air. This airplane is going to brake before we stall. Because what does the stall do? When it stalls, it gets rid of that lift, it gets rid of that force on the wing and reduces it so we don't damage the aircraft. So this is not maneuvering speed. So what does maneuvering speed do for us? Well, let's say that we slow down. In this case, we slow this airplane down to 110 knots. So we're flying at level cruise, 4.5 degrees angle of attack. Same idea. We get hit by a gust of wind, we pull back on the controls really hard, we double this angle of attack to 9 degrees. We're now at 2 Gs, still within our limit for the aircraft, right? About 3.8 to 4 Gs. Then we still have room, but we have not stalled yet. Again, the pull was harder than even that. We go from 4.5 to 13.5 or triple it. We're at 3 Gs now. But notice what happens when we go to quintuple it to that 4 G at that limit for the aircraft. Instead of continuing past it and pulling more Gs than the aircraft is built to sustain, instead the airplane stalls. And so the airplane comes back down and it takes that load off of the wings and we're okay. So the point of all this is that we can use the stall to our advantage in a sense of maneuvering speed. And the other point is that maneuvering speed is not necessarily a speed, it is an angle of attack. We need to know, and what we do is we relate that speed in our aircraft to give us a certain angle of attack. The other point of knowing this too is that what Rod talks about in his book is that if we are lighter than this airplane was, let's say the airplane is like several hundred pounds lighter than this situation, flying at 140 knots, we would even need less. We would need to be creating less lift. We would even need a lower angle of attack, which then means to get to that maneuvering speed, to fly at a high enough angle of attack, this 4.5 degrees, let's say, angle of attack to prevent damage, we would need to fly slower, because as we slow down, we increase angle of attack. So as the airplane gets lighter, your maneuvering speed number goes down. You need to be aware of that. So make sure, a lot of aircraft, I know the newer ones will have different weights. They'll tell you maneuvering speed at this weight. As you get lighter, the maneuvering speed is a little slower and so on. So you need to be paying attention to that, because it is not just the speed. You can't just use your full gross speed all the time, because if you're lighter than full gross, the maneuvering speed is actually lower, because you're potentially going to pull G's more than the airplane can handle if you were to fully deflect or get hit by some really bad turbulence. Okay,
hey, Chris, speaking of Rod and G's, we had a comment saying, I seem to recall Rod saying negative G's were worse on the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Any
he does say that.
logic behind that?
Yeah, and the reason for that is because if you were to go negative G on an aircraft in normal certification, the ones I remember off the top of my head, I told you they could go positive 3.8 Gs in the normal category, they can go negative 1.52. So if you go negative Gs, there's even less capability built into that aircraft. So it's more easily damaged with negative Gs because it's not built to sustain a high number of negative Gs. Aerobatic aircraft are different. Like an extra, it's like plus or minus 8 or 10 Gs or something insane, probably more than the pilot can handle. And actually, that's like something like an extra. I shouldn't say all aerobatic aircraft. I forget what the exact certification is for. I bet somebody in the audience knows, though. And it says that somebody just asked, what if you go lower than the calculated maneuvering speed depending on weight? Flying slower is not going to hurt you. The only thing, of course, you want to do is better to try to look at your manual, figure out what it would be. Rod does, in the article that's linked that I gave you guys, he does explain a basic kind of rule of thumb you can use, which I believe was, and I can't think off the top of my head, but it was something along the lines of it was for every one something, and that's the part I can't remember. Look up the article on maneuvering speed, but he says decrease your, I think it's for every 1% you decrease your weight, decrease the maneuvering speed by 2%, something like that. But don't take my word on that. Look at the article, get the right calculation that he gave. And there's also math equations you can use too. All right. We're coming close to the end of our time. I know that somebody asked about ground effect. I do have that on here as needed, and somebody else asked about something else. But the big things, so I said, what can you do next? Check out, if you're really nerdy like me and you like this stuff, check out Doug McLean's book, Understanding Aerodynamics. I learned a lot from that. I had to read it several times, that section several times through to actually get my brain around it. I hope I did it justice. And then check out the Essential Aerodynamics course by the Air Safety Institute. That's on the handout as well. Okay, we got about 9 minutes. I could go ahead and do ground effect now. And somebody else asked about adverse yaw as well in an email earlier. So let's go ahead. I'll come back to adverse yaw. Here's the ground effect question that somebody asked here on the audience. So this one, I don't, like I said, I am limited when it comes to that super, super deep explanation in Doug's book based on what he talked about. But I have done a lot of research into ground effect before. So that's luckily one that I can talk about. And at first I was like, it took me a long time to get my head around this one. And this is out of Rod Machado's book as well. You can see the copy right there. It's in his private pilot handbook. And so I was like, okay, so Rod explains it. And then I went and I verified with Doug sort of mentions it in Understanding Aerodynamics. I know it's mentioned in the Naval Aviator's Guide, like I'm going to talk about it, something similar, and in Bill Kirshner's Advanced Pilot's Flight Manual. So I felt pretty confident after I found the same understanding in all of them. I'm like, I think I got this. So here's the deal. This gets into more of that 3D stuff. The reason that ground effect changes, and really what is changing is induced drag. This drag up here that's pulling backwards is induced drag. It's the part of lift of an airplane that pulls backwards. And in fact, let me just explain that. Let me go back one here. I'm going to go back to this picture. If you see this picture here, if you stick your hand out the car window, right, and we angle it, we feel our hand go up. But in reality, if you're paying attention, it's also going, let's go this way, going backwards. It's the camera's opposite. It's like that. It's going backwards. So you put your hand out the car window, it goes up and back. So part of the force that we're feeling is pushing our hand up, but part of it is pulling us back. The part that's going up is called, and by Rod Machado and Kirshner and several other people, they call this effective lift. Here's the force that's actually happening on our hand. They call that total lift. The part that's going up is effective lift, and the part that's pulling back is induced drag. It's the drag associated with lift. And it's because as the airflow, the relative wind comes, it's getting deflected by the airfoil, right? And so it's this lift, this total force is perpendicular to that local airflow right here. So as it's getting deflected, that's the way they explain it. That's the actual force we're feeling. The part going up is lift, the part pulling back is drag. So when we come to ground effect, what they're saying is that while the airplane's flying, we have, this is the part we didn't talk about because he didn't even explain the whole thing with vortices, and because he has it in the technical part, and that's the part where it's math and all the other stuff. But basically what's happening is with these vortices, is as the vortices are coming off the wings, there's high pressure underneath the wing, as we know, low pressure above the wing. The high pressure is trying to come up and get around to the low pressure air, so it's pushing into that low pressure air. But of course, at the same time, the wing is moving forward. It creates these vortices behind the aircraft. What that is doing, the effect this has on those fields and that flow, is it is bending the overall relative wind further down than just along the wing. It's affecting it, and that's that part of that drag. So we have lots of induced drag, and these vortices are adding to that. That's why on jets and things, they have those little wingtip, like the wingtip, blanket on the name of them right now, the little winglets. Thank you. Winglets. So the winglets, because they're trying to stop that, because they're trying to reduce drag. That's helped to reduce induced drag. So when we come into ground effect, what is going on out of Rob Machado's book, I love these pictures, is that the vortices get disrupted. So they can't have as much of an effect on that overall airflow under the wing. And so effectively, this airflow is not getting bent down as much. So the overall relative wind, we think of it in terms of straight angles, but in reality, it's a flow. It's not getting bent down as much. And so the force of the total lift is actually allowed to move forward a little bit. When it moves forward, more of it is effective lift and less is induced drag. And so that's why as we enter ground effect and those vortices get disrupted, the airflow starts to not get bent down quite as much. And so more of that force is lift, less of it is drag. And that's why we end up not having to fly at as high of an angle of attack to maintain our aircraft above the ground. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully. All right. Let's see, we got 6 minutes or 4 minutes, sorry, left. Let me go back to the one person also. This is very similar, a related topic. They were asking about adverse yaw. Somebody emailed us in the mailbag, I called it. They said, why is there adverse yaw in a turn? Why does that happen? Well, we can use this same explanation, this idea of effective and induced drag, effective lift, total lift. When we're turning, in this case, the airplane is going to be turning to the left. So it's going to be turning towards where my mouse is spinning right now. So we're turning this way. What do? We lower this aileron to create more lift. Well, when we create more lift, we also create more induced drag, right? So we're increasing the camber of the wing, we're increasing the angle of attack effectively, and so it's going to create more lift here, which creates more drag. More drag here is going to pull the airplane to the right, even though we're trying to turn to the left. And over here, the same thing's happening in an opposite way. Here we are deflecting this aileron upwards, and so that's going to actually decrease the angle of attack, decrease the camber of the wing. We get less lift, therefore less induced drag, less force on the wing. And so this wing is going to want to just not resist that rotation in the opposite direction. And that's why we have to use the rudder to then correct for that, to make the airplane turn in the direction we actually want it to go and stay coordinated. So it's really about keeping the airplane coordinated with the as we're turning. Okay, I hope that answers all the questions at least we had ahead of time. I'm afraid of what I'm going to get here in the sense of I'm hoping I can answer it because, like I said, that lift explanation is pretty much at the limit of the depth that I know when it comes to that. But hopefully I can give you some practical stuff on the other things. All right, go ahead, Dan. Oh, actually, let's do this. Let's call this the official end of the webinar at 12:57. For those that need to go, we wish you, I hope you guys have a great holiday. Merry Christmas, New Year's, the whole deal. Hope you enjoy that. Here is our code. Steven, do you want to give us the quick version of what the app is about here?
All right. Within the AOPA app, one of the functions is the Pilot Passport feature. It has all kinds of information based upon your location, if you allow the GPS to track you there. And it shows places nearby with links to our airport directory. So it shows information about the airport, things you might want to know, things you can check out, and it allows you to check in at the various airports. So like the physical passport programs, you can say, hey, I was there, made a visit, you earn badges, you earn points. And sometimes our marketing folks will do various contests based upon the points. They've been so kind as to provide a special badge for our webinar program. So you see the code there, the YCF WEB 122123 as a special badge for today's presentation.
Cool, thanks, Stephen. And there's the code again, YCF Web 122123 again. And then the questions. Dan, you want to take this one really quick?
Yeah, we've got some great questions in here, and I'm pleased to see at the end of the webinar, we've got people saying, hey, great job, awesome information, thank you. So we didn't just stump everybody or get everybody deeper into those rabbit holes. So great job, Chris. This is really, really interesting stuff. Just wanted to take a quick moment just to encourage and support AOPA membership. If you're not an AOPA member, we would encourage you to do that. Be part of the world's largest aviation community. Discounts, resources, great piece to be a part of. Become a better safe pilot and see the wealth of resource available to you as a member. We'd love you to be a part of it. AOPA.org/membership.
All right, cool. And then just a quick thing to the official end. We will stick around and answer questions, of course, as we always do. But next time, hopefully you'll join us again, January 18th, 2024. How did we screw it up, Stephen? We forgot to check the year.
Oh, no.
2024, not 2023.
Or,
At 12 to 1 Eastern. Like we checked everything and we still missed that stuff. Anyway, next time we're planning on doing one called CFI, Checklist for Instructors. That's what it stands for. How to find and or be a good CFI. So we're going to talk about how you would get your CFI, but also how to be a good CFI and also how to find a good CFI. We're going to try to combine them all at once. And yes, I will put the app code back up in a second. So, and please, on the chat or at ftinitiative@aopa.org, please let us know if you've got ideas or things that you would like us to talk about. If there's more aerodynamics that you're wondering about, please let us know. So put it in the chat or email us directly at ftinitiative, that's Foxtrot Tango, initiative@aopa.org. Let me go back. Somebody had they would request for the code again for the app. Remember, this is not for Wings credit, not for Wings credit. That is just the AOPA pilot app, YCF Web 12/21/23. It's literally You Can Fly webinar and then the date 12/21/23. Hopefully
coincidentally, this is the last time we will have the badge for our program.
Yes.
Something
and that's
is changing
mainly because of a change in the app, not so much because they're
the app or some programming issues. Yeah, they're not going to be able to provide those in 2024. So this is get it while it's hot. So last one.
Yes, right. So get in there now. Oh, and by the way, though, do please understand that if everybody goes there right now and puts their code in, you all get no. It's like actually, please don't do that because the thing it'll crash because it's not meant for our huge audience to go in there all at once. So give it a little bit of time, wait half an hour, then put the code in. You should be good to go. Oh, and then Stephen, before we go, was there anything that in the spirit of Christmas that you had?
Oh, well, sure. For folks who are still hanging around and want to be a part of it, I do have some T-shirts we can give away.
What's that? A T-shirt?
T-shirts. They're the Sun and Fun shirts from this year, so they've got the 2023 date on them. But I've got some 6 extra larges and 1 large size shirt that I can give away. So next 7 people who would like a shirt, please comment T-shirt in the questions log and I'll get your information.
Somebody put their size in. We'll get the size. Don't worry. We'll contact you. Just get that in there. Well, let Stephen make the call on this when we see them coming in. Perfect. All right.
Giving some stuff away for the holidays.
That's right.
All right. We have plenty of T-shirts. We are well over. We are now into the 20s and 30s.
Okay, guys, we do have our winners, but appreciate your participation.
So before we get to questions, because our feed is rifling through and we can't control it, there is one that I remember from our friend Steve on the West Coast. Said, hey, back to the poll, A and B, they're both the same. So
yeah. And in fact, I would even, and I agree with you, Steve. In fact, I would even I was remiss in making the poll when really thinking about this. In reality, I think that what McLean would say, in fact, what he does say in the book, is that they are both happening, and it's not even a one or the other. It is literally both things are working together to make it all happen. That you need the Newton, which is that there's pressures happening to deflect the airflow that sustain those pressure fields, and then those pressure fields are the Bernoulli part, because that's the part that's actually creating the high pressure below, pushing the wing up. So his analysis and his explanation is basically the two of them are working together. You cannot separate them out. It is not a win or whatever. They're both there, and this thing's complicated. Like I said, I enjoyed his breakdown. He does have another article he wrote later on in this a thing called The Physics Teacher. He did a 2-parter where he got into more depth. I have not gotten access to that because you had to pay extra for that, and I just haven't spent the money to buy the article, which I want to do. But yes. All right. What else you got?
And back to Steve while we're with him now. Back to his original comment, the center of lift on top of airfoil is aft the center of lift on the bottom. Asked for a little more clarification on that. And the response was, so the twisting moment, pitching down moment, airfoils alone are unstable.
There you go. Got it. That's a good point, Steve. Thanks for sharing that with us too. You're exactly right. So that would even go into more of the instability of the airfoil, much less just balancing the aircraft on one point. You've got the thing that it just wants to twist itself. So I like it.
All right. Here's one from James. He said, another way to consider this all, total pressure is composed of static pressure plus dynamic pressure. Energy is not created or destroyed in this process, so the type of pressure at a given place moves between dynamic and static.
Yes.
And
In
much
fact,
like you said earlier, Chris, he finished by saying, "There's more, but ...
yeah, because
There's a
that gets
whole lot.
into, I think that I know that I've seen people talk about, and by the way, on the handout, I put videos from some YouTube ones that I found. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading, a lot of watching as I was prepping for this beyond just his book. And so there are people that talk about things like conservation of momentum, conservation of energy that are all involved in this too. And again, I was just going with Doug's explanation just because of like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's got a lot of background. I'm going to just try to limit it because I no doubt, in fact, I know that he talks about, folks out there might know about things like circulation theory, and he talks about that too in the technical part. So I know that stuff's in there, but again, I need to spend some time learning some math so I could understand it.
Yeah, that's pretty complex. When he paged through that book earlier, I was realizing that was not my evening read coming up here for right now.
Just
But
the 16 pages are like enough just to like make your mind explode.
I love it. Here's an interesting point. Perhaps Bernoulli principle creates the forces, and Newton governs how the forces affect the wing.
That's an interesting way of putting it, because it's like in a sense of that there is the downflow, and then like this, he does say that the Newton sustains, like the motion caused by the Newton sustains those fields, and then yeah, that's a possible way of thinking about it. I know that the big part he says though is Newton sustains the fields, and those fields, the pressure differences create the actual force of the lift, but
Gotcha.
they work together hand in hand. You cannot separate them out, and that goes along with, like I said, with my my uncle too that I mentioned. He said something similar.
Gotcha. And in this, by no way is an endorsement. It's a YouTube channel I have not heard of. Maybe you have, Chris, but thought it would be worthwhile for others to look into. Is that the YouTube channel 60 Symbols had an interesting version of explaining how lift works. So 60 Symbols, go ahead, check it out. I haven't been there. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that one, but I will definitely take a look because I love learning about this stuff.
Center of pressure came up. I'm sorry, I lost the context of where that one came in. But the phrase was, this is what defines the center of pressure. Does that jog anything for our conversation today?
This is what defines the center of pressure. I'm wondering if they were talking about when I was talking about those pressure areas where it's concentrated, maybe, because that kind of is the center of pressure.
I'm sorry, I lost track of that one in the context, but thought it was an interesting point. Here's one. Patrick has left, but as a retired F-18 pilot, I think it would be worth noting. Supersonic airflow and the huge cone that forms well beyond the wing. So there's lots of great shots on the web of fighters flying in high humidity air where you can see that cone. It exemplifies just how far from the wing the airfoil is effective. And then a little bit of like nudge, nudge. He says, obviously, when you go supersonic, it really gets interesting. So I thought that was a fun.
In fact, this book has the technical explanation. I think he goes into supersonic stuff too. That is one I have not ventured into because I started trying to read it before and I was like, oh man. But not that I don't want to learn.
Sure. Lot of notes about angle of attack. And some of it, and one of them that I thought was interesting, and we've heard this before too, was why is that an angle of attack indicator not like standard equipment on an airplane? Any thoughts to that? If it's what is really governing what's happening in the air, how come we're not using that bit of technology?
We had this question, was it before maybe or in another forum?
We've talked about it, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that. And the main reason is because number one is back in the day, I mean, only jets and things like that had them because they were expensive.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing them. I know one of the airplanes, we have like one here that's one of the airplanes has an angle of attack indicator on it. So you can now install them on a GA aircraft. I think they're not as expensive, I'm sure, as they used to be, and they're coming down in cost. So I think as technology moves forward, we will see that become more and more available. Because yeah, absolutely. Like when you look at the military guys and the jet guys, they fly when they're coming to land. They are flying an angle of attack. They're not flying an airspeed because they know that angle of attack is going to keep them where they need to be. So yes, we should have them. I think it's just more of cost. And remember, a lot of the airplanes we're flying, Cessnas are wet. I mean, even the new ones, a lot of us fly are 20 years old. And it's like if you're flying like a P model or an old, what am I thinking of? Like an O or an N, actually an N is what I'm thinking of, the N model. They're from the 1970s. So just didn't have that stuff back then. That wasn't available in a way.
Gotcha. Have you heard of the flat plate effect? There was a mention of the flat plate effect.
Yeah, I don't recall that at the top of my head. Yes, I have heard of that. I know that that is in the FAA stuff. It talks about the flat plate effect. And again, I'd have to refresh my memory on that one because it gets into that. I think it's in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge.
Okay. Here's one, and this was, again, context. Hopefully we can capture it. But if both, so if one or both of these are proven false, my guess it was Newton or Bernoulli in this, but I'm not sure if that was the case. Maybe it was something else. Maybe you can remember. Does my plane fall out of the sky? So interesting take on it that maybe it's the sum of those or a factor of those, or that they're both acting at the same time to keep the plane flying. I just thought.
So say that again. So does that? What's the exact question?
It says, so if one or both of these are proven false, does my plane fall out of the sky?
No, I assume they mean if one of these theories that we're talking about, if they're proven false. No, obviously not. We know that practically speaking, the airplane works. And that's why I said practically speaking, as somebody learning to fly, if you're learning to fly, you do not need to know anything remotely. The stuff I talked about earlier with low pressure above, high pressure below, or that Newton pushes the air down, that's good enough. Really, the important part you need to know about is the stuff with the stalls, critical angle of attack. That's what you need to know.
Chris, we had a note about the vortex lifting line theory. That's not something I'm familiar with. Are you familiar with that?
Vortex lifting line theory? No. And so they have a comment, or they just said
no, that was just it. It just said that with an exclamation point. So point made, but we're not exactly sure what what it is there.
Right. So I'll jot that down. Vortex
lifting line theory.
It may be another theory that they were getting at. I'm not sure if I was touching on that with the explanation that McLean gives, but.
Sorry, my allergies are kicking in here.
No worries.
We talked about this. It's not the air flowing over the wing, it's the wing passing through the air. We had some specific questions to using Garmin Pilot. I think we better let those be served with our friends over at Garmin. I'm sure you can email that in there. Another article that may shed some light is in Scientific America called "No One Can Explain Why Planes Stay in the Air."
It's on the handout, you guys. I found that was one of the ones I talked about. In fact, they are talking about his book and his explanation. They even mentioned the other article that he wrote and then some other folks. So check it out. The link for that one is in the handout. Go check it out. I read that one too. Good one.
Great. The video that you've shown, is that course linked on the handout as well?
It is. I want to say it's one of the first bullets, like second or third one down. It's the Air Safety Institute's Essential Aerodynamics course.
Great. Yep. We did have an ask for that. So that is in the handout. So please see that.
Good course. And they get really practical. They talk about what do you need in a practical? How do you keep yourself out of trouble? Good course. So definitely go take that.
And you may not, oh, here we go. We had an aerodynamicist. Oh, and someone just jumped in and took it off. No need here for the vortex lifting line theory. That is too premature and analytical. So our friend Paul, an aerodynamicist. Love it.
Good, and I'm hoping I did it justice, Paul. Yeah, so saying that, I'm hoping I did a decent job of trying to interpret Doug's, but like I said, go check out his books. You can interpret it for yourself too. But I tried to like bring it down into something that I can understand.
All right. Vortex generates a high negative pressure on top of the wing. Vortex lift increases with angle of attack as seen on lift. AOA plots. Oh gosh, people do that and it moves my screen every time they jump in. AOA plots which show the vortex or unattached flow adding to the normal attached lift as an extra nonlinear component of the overall lift.
Okay, I'll get out there. I'd have to go read that and to get that because it's obviously really difficult to put that into the comment and explain.
Yep. All right. And Paul was asking for the handoff, but I think he found it. But in the control panel, if you're looking for the handout, it's in the control panel, whether you're on a mobile device or on the web browser. Just look over at that control panel. You'll see handouts. Just click on the little arrow to the or triangle to the left of it, and you'll be able to download that PDF.
And the other thing too is when this gets put onto YouTube in our playlist, Stephen will put a link in the description or the comments that I'll have that so you can get to it. I'll have a file so you can download the handout there as well.
Yeah. And right now we're just getting comments saying thanks, great job. So credit to you, Chris. I think we're in a good spot to wrap it up for today.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, everybody, I want to thank you so much for being here with us. I appreciate you going along with my nerdy journey into Lift. I'm hoping you guys enjoyed it too. On behalf of all the folks here at AOPA, we want to wish you guys a great holiday. Hope you have a great new year, and we will see you. And let me just click ahead to that one. Where is it? There it is. We will see you January 2024, not 2023. You have to update that for that CFI win, and hope to see you then. And other than that, I guess let's call it. Thanks for being here.
All